So today's Moravian reading is from John chapter 18 verse 12 through to 18. It's set on that Good Friday of Jesus' crucifixion, but at the moment we're in the earliest hours of the morning, at maybe 1 or 2 or 3 a.m. And Jesus and his disciples, they shared their Last Supper together on that Thursday evening, and then they've headed out of the city in the early hours of the morning up onto the mountain, the olive grove called Gethsemane, so that Jesus can pray through the night as was his custom. And we saw in yesterday's reading how Judas identified Jesus and betrayed Jesus with a kiss. And in today's reading, it starts with this detachment of Roman soldiers, a tenth of a legion, around 600 men, arresting Jesus. He's bound with ropes and he's taken to Annas's house. He's the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest. They live in this oikos together. Of course, this man Annas, he had no legal or religious power to do anything, but he's clearly the guy behind the scenes calling the shots in this scenario. Jesus is being led like a lamb to the slaughter. Of course, Jesus had 12 disciples. We know one has betrayed him, Judas. 9 have fled. They are absolutely nowhere to be found. But here, Peter and John follow Jesus. They stick with Jesus. John, the author of John's Gospel, he often refers to himself as the other disciple, or the disciple Jesus loved. It's his way of speaking of himself. And I think it's implied that John is somehow a relative of this household, this oikos. He seems protected within this grouping and is able to arrange for Peter to come in through the gates into the courtyard of this oikos. I imagine that Peter and John are there. They've stepped up to be those 2 legal witnesses that are required to represent someone in trial. The fact that they're there is to be commended. Everyone else has fled. But the fact that the powers that be do not use them in this way shows what a sham trial this is that Jesus is having to go through. And as we read through the story, we know what happens next. A young servant girl says to Peter, "Hey, Peter, aren't you one of those disciples, one of Jesus's disciples?" And Peter says, "I am not." It's the first of 3 denials. So here's Peter, this rough and ready fisherman. Just hours earlier, he'd drawn his sword against 600 soldiers and taken off Malchus's ear. And let me tell you, he was not aiming to remove the ear, he was aiming to remove the head. And now, just a few hours later, Peter is swinging from courage to cowardice in just a matter of hours. And I don't know about you, but, well, I take huge comfort in this story because I know that I can blow hot and cold for Jesus. I can swing between the two. And those times where I'm not boldly living out the Christian life, well, they are often in my courtyard moments. You think of Peter in that courtyard at night. Times that feel dark and cold and confused and isolated. But we know how this story ends, don't we? We know that Jesus will restore Peter and forgive Peter. But even more than that, he will restate Peter, the rock on whom he will build the church. He will appoint him to be the first leader over that church in Jerusalem. Such is the wonderful redemptive grace of God to us, his children. And we are living in such challenging times these days, testing times. Everything feels contested, especially our witness for Jesus. We're in those courtyard type of moments. But don't let guilt or shame fall on you. Reject that pressure to just be, if only I could be a better Christian and tell everyone about Jesus. No, rest in his grace. Allow it to warm your heart. Jesus was writing a new testimony of grace in Peter's life, and that's what he wants to write in your life in these days. Jesus will lead you through this into a place of freedom and purpose once again, and that will be your testimony, his grace at work in your life. Amen.